Good morning, Eckhart here. This is part of the regulations course. We need to just get ready for the exam, the FAA written exam. So we're going to review airspace operations. So you've seen this slide several times already about the airspace, just as a review. Just keep that in mind. Remember the memory items that we used for the different classes of airspace. A for altitude, the high altitude sector, B for big, C for crowded, D for dialogue, E for elsewhere that's controlled, and then G airspace, or Gulf, is uncontrolled, where we'll do most of our flying. So keep that in mind. This is another one here that would be handy to memorize or to make a picture. Of course, you won't be able to refer to your camera or your telephone during the exam, so that's something to think about as well. But Class B being the solid blue line or marked around airports, so our marking controlled airspace. Class C being the solid magenta. Class D being the dashed blue line. Class E with an airport, that's from the surface, dashed magenta line. And Class E without an airport, those are the gradient blue or gradient magenta shaded lines. We're going to do some reviews in a second. Everywhere else that's not marked is Class G. Below 700 feet around, below 700 feet in Class E areas without an airport, or 1,200 feet everywhere else is Class G. So we have, of course, review these things as well. You ought to be able to remember those fairly easily. Remember the bottom TFRs, temporary flight restrictions, not listed on charts, or temporary. No one's allowed to fly there. Okay. What kind of airspace is this? It should pop right to your mind. This is the kind of question they're going to give you, is asking what kind of airspace. Obviously, it's dashed blue line. By the way, it's typically a 4-mile diameter. Class D airspace is typically a 4-mile diameter circle around a controlled airport. You notice it's blue colored with a runway depicted in that blue dot, so it's got a control tower. The question next might be, well, so ask yourself, what would be the frequency you'd want to listen to if you were flying in that area right outside that? Let's say we don't have permission, but we're just outside that blue dash line, and we're operating. We would like to know if there's an airplane flying nearby, a manned aircraft flying by. So the question might be asked on the exam is, what frequency would we listen to, monitor, to determine or hear about traffic? Well, you need to be able to find that on the chart. And it is in the blue section where it says Heart of Georgia Regional, it says Control Tower, or CT 124.77. Notice that next to that there's a dot with a C in it. That simply means that it's a part-time tower, and there may be some times during the day or night where the tower is closed, and then you would use that frequency, 124.55, as a CTAF frequency, Common Traffic Advisory frequency. So if the tower was closed, other manned aircraft would be calling in, giving position reports coming in and out of that airport. You'd be able to listen to it. Also, chart familiarization with that 25 in the brackets, just to the lower right of the airport. That's the top of the airspace, surface to 2,500 feet. So again, the frequency to listen to in that area would be 24.55. All right, next. All right, here's another slide. Different airport. This is Chattanooga, as you see. What class airspace is this? It should pop to your mind fairly quickly. When you come to the written test, you can go to the chart, to the testing guide, and look at the legend. But 60 questions. It is a timed test, so you might want to know this stuff ahead of time. But anyway, even if you don't, you could look at the legend that's in your testing supplement. But anyway, Easier yet was just, it's a C, Class C magenta lines and segments also. And the same question could be asked, if the tower was closed, what frequency would you monitor to check on manned aircraft in and out of this area? The circle C next to control tower 18.3 simply means that when that tower is closed, again, that becomes the common traffic advisory frequency. Some airports it'll say it'll spell it out CTAF, and you'll know. But in this case, it's a control tower airport. All right. Class C, solid magenta. Okay, here's another one. We've looked at this chart thousands of times during this course of study, but still I'm going to ask you what class airspace is this around the Atlanta International? Well, obviously the Class B is solid blue lines around the airport with segments. So the question might be, find Griffin. It's the bottom, slightly to the right bottom there's Griffin. And the question might be, what are the controlled airspace limits over the top of Griffin? So you look around till you find that little 125/60. So the bottom of the airspace over Griffin is 6,000 feet. The top of the airspace, controlled airspace, is 12,500 feet. So that's one of the kind of questions you're going to receive from that. All right, here's another one, which several questions involved in this one. We'll look at Northwest Alabama Regional Airport. What class airspace is that? Magenta. You'll also notice that the airport doesn't have a control tower. It's Class E. Class E with an airport, so it goes from the surface. All of that area in there is controlled airspace. Even though they don't have a tower. And what frequency would you listen to for traffic? You see the little C and a dot and a C within C inside, 123.05. And then the other part of the question is, okay, there's the shaded areas we mentioned earlier. Magenta shaded areas. Inside those areas, the bottom of controlled airspace is 700 feet. Outside, everything outside those areas, it's 1,200 feet. So it's Class G below 699 feet to the surface is Class G, which is uncontrolled airspace within the shaded parts, except for when you get into the dashed magenta line, which it's all the way to the surface, especially for drones. And as we're looking at all this stuff, you also want to remember some of the symbols as well. In the lower left corner, there's some kind of restricted area, looks like magenta shag carpet, but don't need to get into that right now. We'll talk about that a little later. Also, review the. You all have copies of the testing supplement. You should have that at home, so you can review that as well. But chart symbols, just reinforce this again. The magenta is uncontrolled airports. The blue colored designations for airports are controlled airports. Just because it's blue doesn't mean it's always have a control tower operating, right? They could be part-time. All the other symbols, the R, private airport, non-public use, having emergency or landmark value, abandoned aircraft, so the symbols are important as well. Just want to be familiar with those. I'm just bringing it up so you can be, again, familiarize yourself with these markings and indications. Airport data, this is on the legend of the chart as well. So if you're trying to if you forget what the little C with a circle is there, it explains it. Also, a lot of information. Oh, the other thing that we would note here is that it tells you whether, we know that traffic patterns are standard left-hand turns, but sometimes it says RP next to the runways. That means it's right-hand patterns, non-standard. Yeah, you go down the string, you see the little circle with the C inside of it, common traffic advisory frequency. So none of these, also elevations, See the symbol for elevations, length of the longest runway, does it have lights? Any kind of question you might receive, you could look in the legend and go, oh, there it is. I remember what that is. Because you ought to be familiar with it. We've talked about it in the past. And here is the other part of the legend that will be helpful perhaps when one of the questions involves finding a location, and the question is this class G, class B, class C. Well, there it tells you what the symbols mean. It also gives you down the bottom of this little picture here, it has the shag carpet indications, whether it's a prohibit area or an alert area. Also these airways, Victor 69, a little bit higher up. Lots of information here to help you with the test. The top part of this panel is not that interesting, or the second, but the obstructions and miscellaneous, even topographical information, those are things that drone pilots would be helpful to know, or at least to be able to refer to. They talk about towers, and they give a question about mean sea level or above ground level. Well, you can look there and it explains which number is above ground level and which symbol number is above mean sea level. So don't let that question bomb you out. You can look at the chart supplement. Of course, you can spend a lot, if you're not familiar with it ahead of time, you can spend a lot of time going back and forth to the chart supplement, to the legend, to find answers to questions you probably just ought to know. On the top of the chart, these are information about these restricted areas. You're not going to be tested on that, so I'll just pass by that. It's just of interest, I thought. Okay, there is a question that I've seen on the test that indicates it has what they call VFR checkpoints. It's got a little flag above it with the name of the checkpoint. It could be a Lake Drummond, or it could be a power plant or something like that. And this, it's a location indication. You would, if you were calling, if an airplane was calling the tower, they might say, "Hey, I'm over the power plant. Want to come in and landing?" Well, that doesn't, unless you understand where to look on the chart, you would have a hard time finding out where they are, or at least knowing which way to look. So that's all this is. Also indicates that there's maybe more traffic there than that you need to watch out for, because a lot of people are coming in and out of there. This, I guess, is more of FYI information. These wildlife service areas, Bureau of Land Management, U.S. Forest Service areas are typically require manned aircraft to stay 2,000 feet above the ground level here, and a lot of them do prohibit drones, simply because drones are annoying, apparently. Okay, here's an example of military training routes. They're routes used by military aircraft to maintain proficiency in tactical flying, so high speeds. Normally, aircraft are limited to 250 knots, below 10,000 feet, but they need practice going very fast, so they may be going faster than that, and they may be going very low as well, so this could be a real hazard. Some fighter aircraft pops over the trees at 400 feet, and you're at 400 feet, yeah, so the chart is warning you, if you just happen to be along one of those routes, hey, heads up. They're listed as in gray, and it'll be IR. You see where it's pointing right there, IR 037. That's the name of that route. It may be VR. IR simply means that this might be in poor weather. There might be an aircraft doing this. They're limited. They're a little bit higher. They're not as low to the ground. But if it's VR, they may be even lower to the ground, below 1,500 feet, as a matter of fact, above ground level. So just be aware that there are military training routes. The danger here is high-speed aircraft maneuvering. It might be a slow-moving aircraft. It could be a very slow helicopter moving through there. I believe there's some military helicopter operations in the North Georgia mountains that could present a hazard. All right, we have a compass here. Just be familiar, compass orientation is really essential for the test as well. There's a number of questions that refer to directions west of the airport. What does that mean? That means, you need to know what that means. Also, runways are numbered by the magnetic heading of the runway. There's questions about that. A runway that's pointing to the north would be a runway 36. A runway pointed to the south on magnetic heading south would be runway 18. A runway that was pointed at 60 degrees magnetic would be runway 6. And the reciprocal of that would be runway 24, would be heading to the southwest. So those things, you need to be familiar with that. We've talked about it before. But you obviously need to understand which heading you're going and where you are in relation to a specific location. So they might call traffic. You might be monitoring the tower and the traffic calls west of the airport, then you would want to know what that meant. The questions typically for the FAA exam will be, you're operating south of the airport and another aircraft is on downwind leg for runway 6. On a right downwind runway 6, are you going to come close together? That kind of question. Another example would be, you are flying your drone north of the airport and you hear a manned aircraft report left downwind for runway number 9. They're asking the questions is that aircraft going to come close to your location? So know the compass, sort of understand how that works, but also know what traffic patterns are like. Now we're going to do another module to get in more detail, but this is just a rough reminder again that we've talked about. There are different legs that manned aircraft use to report to one another, and we need to know that because if we're operating near an uncontrolled airport, we need to know where to look for the traffic. When they say they're on left downwind for runway number 9, we know where to look for them because we sort of understand what these patterns are. And you can see the aircraft in this example, the one on the left side pointing toward the right, he's on final for runway number 9. So he's on final approach. Then on the other side of the runway, he's departing and he's on upwind. Then on number 5, he's turned crosswind, and then he turns downwind. And downwind is all that whole straight line that ends with number 2. That's downwind. Then right after number 2, he turns base, and number 3 is final approach. Also, we need to remember or be aware that traffic tends to enter at a 45-degree angle to the downwind leg at traffic pattern altitude. There is at least one, well, there's more than one question that will ask that specific question. What is the proper entry for a manned aircraft into a traffic pattern? Well, it's 45 degrees to the downwind at traffic pattern altitude is the answer. So think through this now. There's a runway that points to up to the top of the chart, assuming that this picture north is the top of this picture. The runway that's pointing up towards the top of the chart, what would be the number? What runway would that be called? Be runway 36 because it's heading that way. That's exactly why, even though they didn't write the numbers on this picture, I could say that the aircraft on number 3 is on final approach for runway 9 because to the right of the chart would be east. The top of the chart, if the top of the chart is north, the right of the chart is east, and the left of the chart is west direction. Downwards is south, or 18. Upwards is 36. To beat that concept to death, sorry, but yeah, by now you really need to be able to sort of understand that. Remember that traffic pattern altitude for propeller-driven airplane is normally 800 feet above ground level, but for turboprops it's 1,000 feet. But for helicopters, traffic pattern altitude is typically 500 feet above ground level, which puts it pretty close to where we are. So let's just go through a few examples. that might be on the test. Let's see. Let's say, well, by the way, I do want to remind you that aircraft land into the wind. So even if you hear a traffic calling, you'll already know where the wind is coming from and which way they'll be landing. So if the wind was out of the southeast, you would expect the airplanes going in and out of this particular airport right there would be landing on runway 14 towards the southeast, into the wind. Just like the birds, they land into the wind because runway distance is an important thing. You don't want to run off the end of the runway, so the landing distance is going to be shorter, plus less wear and tear because the ground speed when you touch down will be lower. So that would be one question. So let's see, you're here, you're in the area, traffic calls left downwind. Where is he in relation to this particular airport? So left downwind for runway 14, where would he be? Well, you have to turn your head around, perhaps, but you have to sort of imagine he takes off on 14 and he makes a left turn. That's crosswind. Makes downwind turn. Yeah, so he is northeast of the airport. So if you're operating, around those little trees that are depicted on the chart there, you keep an eye out. He might be somewhere near you. By the same token, if the wind was calm, he might be taking off on runway 32. If he was on left downwind for runway 32, he would be southwest of the airport. Makes sense? Here's another example. This is Chattanooga, by the way. This is a legitimate question. Control tower informs you that there is traffic on right downwind for runway number 2. Is the traffic east or west of the airport? West of the airport. I'm sorry, he's east of the airport. Right, so number 2 is going up to the top of the chart, so he gets to the top and he turns a right downwind, would mean a right turn, so he'd be turning towards the east. And then as he turns downwind, he'd be heading towards the southwest, but he would be east of the airport. So he'd be able to know where he is. He's not going to tell you necessarily all the little details. Here's the final one. Here's a final example here would be you are operating south of the airport, and you've got permission. You're monitoring the tower. The tower knows you're there. The tower notifies you to stay clear of runway 4 final approach course. Where is final approach? You need to know that. Final approach is that point where they're pointing directly at the runway that they're about to land, and they're also descending because they want to land. You're south of the airport, so you need to be looking to the northwest for that traffic, and you don't need to move towards the southwest, right? You need to operate, either stay south or move to the east of the airport, because the final approach course is to the southwest. Okay, that's good review. Think through that and take the test. There are a couple more items here. Oddball items that don't really fit anywhere else, but you'll be questioned these. There's questions on these as well. These are runway holding position signs, and this particular one is a sign at the end of runway 14. There's also on the left side of it, there's a taxiway sign. It's for taxiway names, it's just black with yellow inside lettering. But for hold position signs, it's red with white lettering. And 14 is the runway number. That's runway 14, hold short. That just means don't cut on that runway until you receive permission from air traffic control to proceed. So that's what that means. It's a test item, so that's why I'm mentioning it. It seems odd because, again, but just one of those things you need to know. Here's another one, a taxiway marking questions about this. These are runway holding position taxiway markings. Purpose is to hold aircraft short of the runway until ATC gives clearance to enter. So we're on the good side, okay? But see the double solid lines? You're not supposed to proceed past the double lines until the tower gives you permission to go past that. Just sort of like a highway indication. Remember the double solid lines? You're not supposed to go past that line. You're supposed to cover the other lane. Now, if you're on the other side, they're dashed lines. So if someone's on the other side of that line, they're supposed to get over on this side. But stay over here because you need to get off that runway. Somebody else might want to land. And if you're a drone and you're on that side of those markings, on the other side of the markings, then you are in the way of other manned aircraft. So you need to get back on this side. So you're not allowed to cross these lines. It's the solid lines you don't want to cross. Dash lines, yes. Another odd question is visual scanning for traffic. They'll ask this, and this is not actually not an oddball concept. It's an oddball question, but it's a good concept. As you're looking for traffic, you don't want to be flicking your eyes back and forth just at random. But they're suggesting that the best way to find traffic as you're scanning the sky to see, make sure you don't run into somebody else, is to scan back and forth 10-degree sections of the sky and stop, look for a second, then move 10 degrees over and look for a second and move, just scan. And focus to the distance as well. Move from far out toward yourself. Incidentally, the FAA has statistics. They keep statistics on collisions or mid-air collisions, and that doesn't happen. That's very rare, but there is often incidents where aircraft come close together, and so the statistic that they determine has determined that 81% of the time these mid-air scares, I guess would you call it, occur during clear skies with perfect visibility. So it's clear visibility. Most of these incidents are clear skies, which is interesting, I think. But for us, that's important for us as well. We often fly with clear skies. We need to develop a pattern of scanning the sky and not staring at one particular location. Let's see, here's a couple questions here that relate to what we've just talked about. You've received authorization to operate a UAS at an airport. When flying the UAS, air traffic control tower instructs you to stay clear of all runways. Which situation would indicate that you are complying with this request? And this is about a runway marking thing. I won't belabor this, but all right, there it is again. You are on the solid line side. You're on the double solid line side of the markings near the runway. So that you are complying with their request. He says, stay clear of all runways. Staying on this side of that dash line, or the solid lines, you're complying. Okay, what's the purpose of the no entry sign? And we didn't talk about this, but it seems like a no-brainer to me. No entry means you're not supposed to enter. And sure enough, it looks like that, by the way. But it identifies a paved area where aircraft are prohibited from entering, so don't go there. Guy wires. Now this is an odd question that I didn't cover. This is a recommendation from the FAA, but it is a test question as well. They are saying, and guy wires, you know what that is, right? That we have a tower, and they'll have wires off to the side that support it for whatever reason. Many towers don't have guide wires at all, but most of them do have some kind of a guide wire. The FAA is recommending 2,000 feet horizontally to keep clear of towers. We'll review right-of-way rules for just a moment here. The regulation says this: each small unmanned aircraft must yield the right-of-way to all aircraft, all airborne vehicles, all launch and re-entry vehicles. Yielding the right-of-way means that the small unmanned aircraft must give way to the aircraft or vehicle and may not pass over, under, or ahead of it unless well clear. Now, in cases where there are two or more drones are operating in the same area, if two drones are approaching each other, head on, each drone is supposed to deviate to the right to give way, both turning to the right to give way, or altering course to the right is the way they put it. If you're overtaking another drone, if two drones, one is faster than the other and is overtaking, the overtaking drone is supposed to pass to the right of the drone in front of them. If two drones are coming into land, both of them are in the air at the same time, the one that's at the lower altitude gets priority and gets to land on the landing site first until the other one has to hold and wait. If one of them is on the ground waiting to take off and another one's landing, the one that's in the air that's approaching to land gets priority. The one on the ground has to give way to the one in the air. Size of the drone is irrelevant. However, in all cases, a drone in distress, in other words, a drone that is in an emergency situation, has right away or priority over all other drones. And by distress, I mean maybe a very, very low battery condition or control malfunction. The only way you're going to know that is if there's some communication between you and the other drone operator. So that's a difficult thing and certainly not going to be enforceable, but you would want to give way to someone that's in emergency. You say, oh man, my battery's really low, let me land first. Well, yeah, let them land first. So that's the review part. Hope this is helpful, and don't forget to check out the study guide, the FAA study guide for UAVs, and take the test when you have an opportunity.